A kid from my school was hit by a train and lost both his legs. When he woke up in the hospital, his first words were, "How's the train doing?" What are some of the best ways you have seen someone cope with a terrible situation that changed their whole life? My brother liked to play tricks and pranks on me all the time. His favorite was setting my bathroom medicine cabinet up, so when it opened up all the contents would fall out and crash to the ground and in the sink. Well, when I got home from the hospital after he had passed, I didn't know what to do with myself, so I just went to sleep. When I woke up, I went to the bathroom and opened up the cabinet and everything. I mean everything, even the shelves fell out, and I just stood there, realizing that would be the last time that he would ever do that. I just cried and cried. Then, I look up in the cabinet and on the back of the wall, he taped a note that said, "Have a great day." He had never done anything like that for me. Dude, closest I've ever been to tears on Reddit. Reminds me of Ben from Scrubs. My grandfather died when I was only 3 or 4, he had lung cancer and refused treatment. He was apparently a total badass. His first name was Yong, it's a Cajun name. As he was dying in the hospital bed, he called my mother to him. When she reached his face, he whispered, "It's okay. I always knew I was going to die, Yong. Just don't forget to cancel my gym membership." Literally his last words. He was saving that one for a while. That's why he refused treatment. Wanted to use it while he could still remember it. When my grandma was given some of the ashes of her twin sister, she said, "Knowing my luck, I've probably got a fanny. Dat ash." My mom told me she found out I was half deaf at age 5 and she said to the doctor so he can still kind of hear me yell at him. Not sure if that was a joke or if she was being serious. As a person who is half deaf as well, people ask me things like this all the time. My father has a heart defect, and every 30 some odd years, he has to get one of his valves replaced. About 5 years ago, he was getting a shiny, new metal valve put in. The surgery is an intense one. I'm pretty sure his heart has to be stopped for a certain amount of time. And his sternum has to be sawed in half, and because it's his sternum it can't be in a cast, so he just has to lay there for a month and a half and let the thing fuse back together. My father is in the ICU after his surgery. His chest cavity is still technically open and there are tubes coming out of him. He can barely breathe and is hardly coherent. My mother was the only one of us allowed into the ICU with him. And because she's a nurse herself, the nurses working there let my mother feed my father. She grabbed him a cup of jello and started to spoon it bit by bit in his mouth. Afterwards, my father very softly says something she doesn't understand, and with great effort my father says clearly, "The nurse said I could have another if I wanted it." Alright, my mother goes and gets another jello. She feeds it to my father, and afterwards, he smiles at her and says, "I lied." My aunt immigrated to the US in the mid-80s. She'd come from a very rural part of Gyeongsangnam-do in South Korea, so she had never really driven a car before. My mom, who immigrated a few years earlier, formally learned to drive and already had a license, so she offered to teach her once she got her learner's permit. So one day, my mom and my aunt were at a local bank, practicing her parking skills. It was a slow day, so the parking lot was relatively empty, but it gave my aunt a chance to practice working around other cars rather than just makeshift cones made from cardboard boxes. All of a sudden, in a brief moment of panic, she mixes up the brake and accelerator pedals while trying to pull into a particularly tight spot and crash. She manages to plow my mom's car right up a small incline, through a large window and partway into the lobby of a bank. So, she's sitting there, the alarm's going off, and she's getting stared at from the shocked staff and customers. At this point, she still only has her green card, so she's not really sure if this would be grounds for getting deported and having to start over. My mom isn't faring much better, having gashed her head open as her car was old enough to not have passenger airbags. Thankfully, she was the only injury. After a short while, a concerned bank teller very cautiously approaches the driver's side to see if they were okay. My aunt, still slightly shell-shocked, just rolls down the window, looks at her with the best apologetic smile she could muster, which probably looked more crazed than anything, and said in a thick Korean accent, "Hi, sign outside say you have drive-through service." Nah, It's only a minor case of serious brain damage. One of my friends describing the issues she was left with after denting a 4WD with her head. She's actually pretty much entirely fine, except she has a crap sense of balance now. That's pretty much how I would describe my concussion I had that left me seriously impaired. Sadly, my friends picked it up after I said it twice and then repeated it 100 times like I forgot what I had said. In high school, my friend got hit by a car just after he got off the school bus. He said he wanted to order pizza and see which got to him quicker, the pizza or the ambulance. He had to have titanium put in his legs to help rebuild them. I ran into him a few years later and asked how he was. He said he still had the Ford logo branded on his butt. Teaching GF how to drive. She flips the car over, front end first, and hits her head and knocked unconscious for a minute. Think I was too, but we were hanging upside down by our seatbelts, and while she's freaking out, I reach over and turn off the ignition that was somehow still running. Props to my Ford Taurus, and turn up the radio to jam out to Pink Floyd's The Wall. While we were hanging upside down, she got mad at me for not giving a frick that she just wrecked my car into oblivion. When I found out I had a tumor in my stomach and there was 90% chance it was cancer, my first response was, well, at least I'm not pregnant. My friend had his leg amputated after going into a coma. He keeps a sense of humor about it. A few months ago I saw him dressed up like a pirate, complete with a peg leg. Is the best way to live with it. Good for your friend. Throughout high school, one of my friend's grandmothers had to have both her legs removed thanks to diabetes. However, at separate times, after the first one, I was hanging out with my friend, and his grandmother was there, so asked her how she was doing, and she responded with, well, I got that new job at IHOP. Needless to say, it was the hardest I had laughed in a while. When I was 14 I was blinded, and told I had a 5% of regaining my vision at all. As we were leaving the specialist's office with my antibiotic creams under my lids, protected by 2 eye patches, and having just been told this somewhat devastating news, I turned to my mother while she was leading me to the car and sobbing and said, well, this blows my weekend to heck. Now I'll never get to see an R-rated movie again. I made pirate jokes for hours. I had 2 eye patches. I was the most pirate I could be. Opportunity not wasted. About 3 weeks ago, I crashed my motorcycle while my brother was following me by car. Crashed at about 50 miles per hour when a badger ran into my front wheel. Brother saw me fly off, to his horror, roll along the road, skidding and looking lifeless. He ran up to me completely devastated, thinking I was dead, and said, "Sir Fancy Pants, say something, speak to me." I opened my eyes, stared at him dead in the face, and in a whiny and deliberately pathetic tone said, "Ferris Bueller, you're my hero." Honestly, completely true story. I knew what I was saying, BTW. I wasn't in shock or badly messed up. I was in a car accident about 5 years ago and fractured my back neck in 4 places. In the emergency room everybody had the usual tense and anxious feeling about them. The nurse come over to me and said that she had to take my pants off to inspect for any other injuries I may have. I told her to wait and motioned for her to come closer. I told her she was cute and was welcome to take my pants off. I was pretty doped out on painkillers and gave 0 fricks at that point. It was then that everyone knew I was going to be okay. Should have said, "Hurry nurse, I can feel some swelling in my pants." My dad's cousin Sonny went to Vietnam. His wife, or maybe she was his girlfriend at the time, was so distraught he tried to comfort her by saying, "If I get shot anywhere, it will be in my butt." Incidentally, he was shot 7 times in various places from the butt down. A guy on our soccer team lost an arm in a boating accident. He asked the doctors if they were able to find his arm, and the doctors told him they hadn't and that they wouldn't be able to reattach it anyway. He explained that he just wanted to take it to a taxidermist so he would have something interesting to hang on his wall. Good thing he was a soccer player, unless he's the goalie, that is. Wasn't life changing under any circumstance, but something that happened to me I feel is worth sharing. When I was younger I was an avid rollerblader and fell many times. One time in particular I was going quite fast down a road and went over a patch in the road that spanned the width of the entire street. It looked very short at the time but I caught a bit of there, and when I came down, I somehow lost control of my right blade and because of that I eventually fell. I went down face first with my arms outstretched and slid for 15-20 feet. As soon as I stopped, the guy I was blading with bent down, paused, and exactly like an umpire at home plate in a baseball game, quickly spread his arms out and yelled safe. I look back at the incident and laugh, but I don't think I found it very funny at the time. I fell with my head on the toilet bowl after passing out. Big wound on the back of my head. Woke up in the ambulance, where they asked me who I was, where I lived, etc. to check if my brain functions were okay. I just wanted to sleep, so I grabbed my wallet, all while almost completely tied down, and took out my health insurance card. Here, everything is on there, and then closed my eyes again. My friend cut his arm open, from wrist to elbow, on a piece of glass when he fell off his skateboard. He looked at the injury, which was bleeding badly, and shouted, "Get me a bandage, a cactus, a plunger and a pair of socks." He was okay after a trip to the hospital. I wish I was that witty on the spot. On the way to grab lunch a while back, I was involved in a rather intense head-on car crash, which resulted in a dislocated collarbone and concussion for me. As I was picking myself out from the center console, I looked up and saw my buddy, who was driving, pick himself out of the airbag, spit out a tooth, look around, and say, "Someone call our friend and tell him to bring sandwiches. I'm hungry as crap." He then proceeded to get out of the car, call 911, and ran to help the pregnant lady we hit. I was helping a friend that was being jumped at a party. I grabbed a guide to throw him off. Instead he grabbed the pile of people. The pile landed on my foot and I fell over. Foot staying in position to cause a compound dislocation and fracture of my right ankle. Now, I played college football. I'm 6 feet 6 inches 320 pounds and had a chance for the NFL. I was wearing brand new shoes at night and all I could say was "oh man." Not the shoes, while looking at 4 inches of bone sticking out where my ankle used to be. When I got hit by a motorcycle at traffic lights, he jumped them. The first thing I said when I was going in and out of consciousness on the side of the road was, "It's okay, I had oats for breakfast. I'll have enough energy." Sounds funny, but I'm not getting the reference. A couple years back one of my friends broke his leg. First day of ski season. When we finally got to the hospital we had a couple minutes alone while the nurses were running around and all he could say was, "Get me a freaking joint stat." Also on the ride to the hospital, our long ride on a bumpy road, him laying in my back seat, just the two of us. The song Bulletproof came on. We both slowly started singing along until the point where we were both belting it. When the song ended there was a peaceful silence broken by, "Oh yeah, my leg's broken. Frick." That's like when my brother shattered his wrist snowboarding. The crazy bastard finishes his run, snowboards down to the first aid building, and when we catch up to him all he says is, "Good thing I'm stoned because I broke my freaking wrist." He also went for a park run a month later in flat-bottomed shoes and 2 casts. After my grandma died, my uncle had her cremated and then shipped to his friend's warehouse. It's his mailing address. For some reason, my uncle's friend calls him up and says, "Your mom just got here." We put her up on top of the fridge. My uncle says, "Oh yeah? How's she doing?" Friend replies, "Just chillin' out." When my grandma died, my grandpa and I were sitting in the living room by ourselves. The silence was intense until he said, "Goddamnit, Joyce, couldn't you have made dinner first?" We both laughed pretty hard at that one. That's beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. I have a tale similar to this. My freshman year of high school I got nailed in the eye with a baseball during a practice. Numerous amounts of blood were streaming down my face due to a large gash on my eyelid, and I even was blind for a bit. The first thing I say when my parents get there and see my bloodied, disfigured face, "I think my modeling career is over." This isn't funny but is the most profound thing said to me in this context. My aunt is currently dying from terminal bone cancer. She was diagnosed 3 days before her 60th birthday. This is a woman who has been self-sacrificing her entire life. One reason she wasn't diagnosed until it was way too late is that years ago, she gave up her own home and job with health insurance to move in with my grandmother, converting the bottom level of my grandma's house into an apartment. To help her, she has dedicated her life to helping people and works as a hypnotherapist, and in the past has learned different therapeutic methods and even energy healing. My own thoughts on the efficacy notwithstanding, and traveled to places in the world after major disasters, notably earthquakes in South America in 1999 and 2007. To give free therapy and help to survivors. She is probably the single kindest person I have ever met. There is not a judgmental bone in her body. It was horrible when I received a call about her cancer diagnosis just because it seemed so unfair. It took me a week or two to actually call because there was just nothing I could think of to say. When I spoke with her, she was crying, but said, "This is a journey I didn't know I would take. I'm going to learn new lessons about myself that I never even thought possible. Always remember that every new thing you do is learning. That there is always something valuable, even when it's terrifying and you wish it wasn't happening." I lost it when her voice cracked at the last part, but the message was incredibly poignant to me. My now ex-boyfriend was shot in a really unfortunate accident. The bullet took out T5 so he lost the feeling and use of his legs from the chest down. After collapsed lungs and chest tubes and so on he was strong enough to get out of ICU. His first day in a regular room the girl came in with his lunch tray. She smiled and said "How are you today?" to his credit. He put on what is best described as a scared face and said I don't know. I can't feel my legs. She got this oh crap look. Started to back out of the room and stammered "I'll go get a nurse." He busted out laughing and told her it was all good. That was why he was there to begin with. I think she was a little unnerved but he and I were laughing pretty hard. For a guy at 23 to be paralyzed he was, and remains remarkably positive about everything. Really the only negative thing I ever heard him say was that he was really going to miss being able to feel his dong. My brother suffered from cardiac arrest during a basketball game. Flatlined, but paramedics were able to revive him. He woke up in the hospital 2 weeks later and he asked, "We won, right?" Sadly, however, the game was called due to his incident. After my brother was murdered, my family was understandably devastated. We were pretty much just sitting around in silence between that Monday when it happened and the Friday of the funeral. During that span, we got the usual community outpouring of pity food, so we had our silent sit around broken up by the periodic doorbell. One ring later, it was my turn to answer. After giving me the standard condolences, this woman shoved a wicker laundry basket filled with bagels, cream cheese, and assorted jams into my arms. She justified the generosity with this statement, "I heard you had a big family," to which I immediately replied, "used to be bigger." Her face went pale, and she backed out of the doorway like it was the monster's house. Apparently, my family had gathered around the top of the stairs listening, since I never took that long at the door before. Once I closed it, still too in shock of the entire week's happenings to be aware of what I had said, my sister started to laugh, and then my remaining brother, and then our parents. It was the first time they had laughed in days. Had a brain aneurysm 5 years back, flown to University of Cincinnati ICU neurological department. After 2 days of unconsciousness, woke up to a nurse rubbing my throat trying to see if my involuntary functions still worked. Evidently morphine and brain trauma turns me into a complete butthole. I say, "Get the frick off my throat." She replies, "Oh my god, you're awake and have clear speech in a morphine rage." I replied, "No crap. Which one of you buttholes shaved my head?" Don't remember any of this. It was all told to me a week later by the 6 family members in the In 96 I had a fall at a building site and landed badly on a 12 inches thick concrete floor. Broke a couple of vertebrae, as you do. I tried to get up, run and shout frick at the top of my lungs, but quickly collapsed in a heap when my legs didn't want to work. While my co-workers stood around me in shock at witnessing the fall, while waiting for the ambulance, I told them they'd better sink their boots in while they can, i.e., kick him while he's down. I then asked for drugs. Lots of them. There was a third joke I made. in between screams of agony, but I can't remember what it was right now. Sorry. A bit off topic, but my brother had a friend who told him about his mother. His mother had been in a car accident and lost one of her legs. She can still drive if the car is automatic, and since she has only one leg she's allowed to park on the handicapped parking. The weird thing is that every year she needs to go to the doctor so that he can tell her she still only has one leg and write out a new permission, as if the leg is just going to magically grow out. You're faking that stump, ma'am. I'm freaking onto you. The doctor. I had my first spinal fusion at 19, and 6 months after that I learned my bone had stopped around the screws and that they could move to 4mm. This meant that they would have to go in again and replace the 6 screws and add a bone cage, which would mean a 10-hour surgery. On the drive home with my mom I always thought I had a screw loose, but this is just ridiculous. I heard this story from my friend when his grandmother died. Now both sides of his family can be kinda crazy and totally hilarious, but no one expected this. His great uncle was talking to his grandfather from the other side of the family and said he was his sister. The grandfather didn't hear him right and said who, so the uncle responds with, "You know, the one in the box. I'd introduce you to, but I guess it's a little late for that." In high school my friends and I were crossing the street at lunchtime to go get Slurpees. Our next period after lunch was bio, in which we had a big test for. I was never really the studying type, so my marks tended to be lower than my friends. Anyway, going for Slurpees, crossing the street in sort of a flying V formation. I was towards the end of the V, looking down at a study sheet that I had borrowed from my friend. One of the older kids in school was driving on that road, saw us crossing, and decided to speed up and blow through the crosswalk to scare us. He scared us alright. Scared us real good. His tiny butt car ended up clipping me in the shins, flipping me up into his hood, smashing my head into his windshield, knocking me out and then spitting me off to the side. When I came to, I was already on my feet swearing at him, asking what the frick he was thinking. His reply was that we should not have been crossing there. Then he drove off. We all knew who the guy was. Small town, small school, so while technically it is still considered a hit and run, we'd still be able to find the guy later. After the exchange, I continued to walk to the store for Slurpees. Slurpees freaking rule, and I'm not about to pass one up over some hit and run. Made it back all the way to the next period test, and that's where the pain started. I guess the adrenaline finally wore off, and being that it was test time, which I was doomed anyway, I figured it was probably time to make a visit to the doctor. Diagnosed with a concussion but no broken bones. Didn't end up suing the guy. I very much regret not suing. That was about 10 years ago now, and the morals of the story are, always drink your Slurpees, only study if you want to get hit by a car, and always sue the prick. Only study if you want to get hit by a car. Amen. When we were planning my mother's funeral, she was going to be cremated, it's relevant, and I was asked if I wanted to place anything in her casket. I said I've already bought her a Christmas present. I'll put that in. Oh wait, I better not. It's a cookbook called The Art of Slow Cooking. The day of my grandma's funeral was a happy one thanks to my grandpa. Since it was the first time the entire extended family had been together in 4 years, he made sure to get lots of group photos. And when it came time to go to the church, he stood and addressed us. I know that we're all devastated, but I don't want today to be mournful. Let's celebrate her life and celebrate all of us being together, regardless of the reason. Eleanor would have wanted that. It seems small, but it really put us all in a good mood through the tears, and the day post-funeral was spent drinking, dancing and telling stories, many of which I had never heard before. It's easily one of my most fond memories. My grandmother, and last remaining grandparent, died of cancer earlier this summer. Towards the end she was hardly eating anything but maybe a cup of soup or sipping some tea. During her last week she turned down some soup, tea, and even the offer of a Bloody Mary, her favorite. When offered some really fine champagne she had been saving though, she replied, yes, I believe I would like some. My grandmother's last meal was a glass of bubbly. I feel a new standard for class has been set in my family. My great grandfather was going in for a risky heart surgery. His last day on earth. My dad saw him shaving, He's like, "Why are you shaving for surgery? My boy, if you think I am going to go before the Lord unshaven, you are greatly mistaken." If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.